never asking you a goddamn thing.
So you know somebody doesn't respect you. They listen to reply, not to be understood. They cut you off. They minimize what actually matters to you. They laugh at your boundaries, and then they call you sensitive when you try to hold the line. They show up late, they cancel last minute, forget the things you've told them, because in their world, your time, your energy, even your voice aren't a priority. They're just an option. You see, there are two kinds of people. Those who adjust when they realize they've actually hurt you, and those who expect you to adjust so they don't have to change. You don't need to be disrespected loudly to be disrespected deeply. Sometimes you'll see it. It's just in their tone, in their patterns, in the silence after you're known. Respect isn't what they say when they're watching. It's how they act when they think you'll tolerate it.
Own attitude towards the possibilities of peace, towards the Soviet Union, towards the course of the Cold War.
Our muscle. It was a way of making me feel that they were a part of me.
You see it on the bridge. Wait, how they get it? If the government had to change the screw in the bridge, they had to shut it down. They got state troopers out there. They got lanes closed. They got their strange machines. How did they get up there?
What up, good people? Peace, blessings, glory, praise, and honor to the Most High. Happy early Wednesday. Some of you are going to be seeing this a day ahead of schedule, which is okay. I got Sydney in the building. Shout out to my poets, writers, content creators. Thank you all for being here and gracing us with your presence. You know what time it is. You know what this is about. You see the title. I'm going to turn this over to the one and only and let her cook and do her thing. Grab your pens, your drinks, your snacks, get comfortable, and let's have a good show.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sydney, and I am not excited to talk about this because it is a tragedy for the people in the area. But for those of you that know me or those of you that don't, I love to talk about natural disasters and how they impact human lives. I also like to spread information about safety. So when these earthquakes happened recently, I felt that it was really important to talk about. I'm going to start talking about the Venezuelan earthquakes, but I also, towards the end of the stream, I'm going to be talking briefly about the heat waves in Europe as well, because that is happening currently, and I think it's important to get that information out there as well. So I'll also cover that towards the end. So first of all, Venezuela just suffered from 2 strike slip earthquakes in northwestern and central Venezuela on June 24th this year. Both of the earthquakes were centered around Veros, I believe is how you pronounce it, which is part of I'm going to butcher these names, and I deeply apologize if you're from there. Yaracuy or Yaracuy, which the first one was a 7.2, occurring at, it's in military time, 6:04 p.m. And then 39 seconds later, the same area was hit by a 7.5 earthquake. Both of these earthquakes were extremely devastating, particularly in the cities of La Guaira and Caracas. So far, experts, people who are, I forgot the rescue workers and the government is saying that about 1,700 1,719 people have so far been killed. And they still have a lot of wreckage to sort through. So this was a extremely damaging earthquake, and unfortunately, based on the type of damage that they're seeing, the extensiveness of the building collapse and the city's devastation, they're estimating that it could reach over 100,000 people being killed in this earthquake due to the building collapses and other infrastructure damage. As of today, about 43,000 people are still missing, whether it's under the rubble or they're just unaccounted for because all the systems are messed up right now. So this particular Venezuela is not, it's not uncommon for them to get very large earthquakes. Northern Venezuela lies on a transpressional boundary zone. And as I said, it was a strike slip. So these particular earthquakes happened because the fault lines shifted that way. There's some earthquakes that happen by a plate diving underneath, as is the case with the Cascadia earthquake zone up in Washington area off the coast. But this one is two plates sliding next to each other, and as the plates move on our planet, eventually, as these plates run against each other, they're kind of going to get stuck. And when it becomes unstuck, that will result in an earthquake. And depending on how long it was since the last earthquake, the length of movement that had occurred during that time period, and how stuck it was, will determine how large the the earthquake is. One of the most famous strike slip faults is the San Andreas in California, which is an 800 mile long fault line that runs through California, and was responsible for the notorious San Francisco earthquake, Loma Prieta earthquake. It's a very similar. It's the same type of fault line in Venezuela as it is there, for comparison. This particular strike slip fault line is around the same length actually as the San Andreas. It's about 810 miles, running from the Venezuelan Andes, the mountains, all the way down to Trinidad, and it has a movement of about 0.39 inches. So it's not a lot, but when you have that over time, that is a significant rupture. As I said, it's not uncommon for them to have earthquakes of this size. In 1910, that was the last extreme earthquake, or sorry, 1900, not 1910. That was the last time that they had a significant earthquake on this fault line. That one was a 7.7 that struck near Caracas. But they've had significant earthquakes throughout history. 1641, 1766, 1812 were all significant earthquakes. There was also a more recent one in 1967, but that one was only about 6.6. But it still killed 1,500 people. It still injured 1,500 people and killed over 300. So even the smaller earthquakes can still be equally damaging, especially if it happens in regions that don't have adequate infrastructure, buildings that are meant to withstand large earthquakes. And clearly from this earthquake, the city was not prepared. These buildings buckled and collapsed very widely. They've been putting out aerial imagery of the city, and it looks like a war zone. When you scan the area, you can see just buildings are gone across wide swaths of the city, and it's just piles of concrete and whatever materials that they had been using to build these buildings. So it is it was very significant when you combine the strength of the earthquake and the devastation that it caused. So this is going to be very impactful for the region. The reason why building types are extremely important, ironically, if you have buildings that are built to withstand earthquakes, you actually have a fairly low death toll, because most deaths in earthquakes are caused by falling debris, people having like furniture land on them, the buildings collapsing in on people, objects falling. And you can actually limit a lot of the damage from earthquakes just by having adequately built buildings. But in Venezuela, they have a significant amount of older buildings that are more vulnerable to strong shaking. Particularly buildings that are made with stone are very susceptible to shaking because they're not flexible. And so when the waves, because earthquakes are shock waves essentially that travel through the earth rather than through the air, when they pass through stone, particularly with stone buildings that are held together by like masonry, so like your brick buildings, your adobe buildings, things that are made with brick, the frequency of the earthquake rubs the bricks together and essentially dissolves or turns to dust whatever was holding together the mortar that was holding those bricks together, and so they just fall apart. It's like if you removed the little pieces between the Legos wouldn't stick together. It's kind of the same thing, where the bits that were holding the bricks together disappears, turns to dust, and they're able to just fall apart like Jenga blocks. And so that was part of what caused such a significant amount of damage. In comparison, if you look at Japan, they have done a significant amount of research and work and infrastructure development to ensure that their buildings are able to withstand large size earthquakes. Japan, as we know, is on a major tectonic zone, and they're very, very susceptible to quite large earthquakes. They have the record of, I think, the second biggest earthquake on Earth. They've had plethora of 6, 7, and 8 size earthquakes. They've also had 9 sized earthquakes, which are very rare on Earth, but obviously they still are able to affect certain parts of the globe, not everywhere. The fault line depth or length will determine how large an earthquake we're able to have on that fault line. The earthquake is heavily dependent on the amount of rupture that occurred. I think for the San Francisco earthquake, it was, I think it was like 13 feet. Let me double check. It was 25 miles. Yeah. So that 25 miles of that fault line was able to cause a 7.9 earthquake. So just slightly bigger than this particular earthquake. But the other reason why this particular event was so deadly was because they had twin earthquakes. It wasn't just one, they had two back to back. They had the 7.2 and then the 7.5 roughly 30 seconds later. And the reason why twin earthquakes are more dangerous, I'm sure you could probably assume why. But you're going to have that first quake that will make the infrastructure, the buildings, more vulnerable. It's going to cause preliminary damage. But when you get that second quake, which is also larger, you are going to see far more damage because it's going to destabilize the already unstable areas of the city. And so if certain buildings are already hanging by a thread because they're on the verge of collapse, that 7.5 is going to be the nail in the coffin on the collapse of that building. They do suspect that these two quakes happened on separate fault lines, but that does make sense because oftentimes when you have shifts in one fault line, because all these fault lines are connected, you're going to end up seeing another earthquake happen. It's not been proven, but just from my own research and extensive exploration, I have noticed that I'm focused very much on California, so that's why I'm going to be using examples from California very often, but this does happen in other places, obviously. But in California, within a year or so of us having a earthquake on one area of the San Andreas Fault, you'll often see an earthquake in a different area of the state. And scientists are always very moderate with their assertions, because obviously we don't know everything, and scientists don't ever want to come off as knowing everything. If there are people that are saying for sure this is related, don't trust them. I would always trust the scientist that's more calculated with their explanations. And oh my goodness. And causation, I forgot what the quote is, but like correlation is not causation. Just because they look like they might be related doesn't mean that they are. But because of the both regional, what's the word I'm trying to use? My brain is not working this morning. The proximity, because of the regional proximity as well as the time proximity, it is highly related. It's highly likely that these two are connected, related for sure. They're saying that the 7.2 is definitely a foreshock of the main shock. A lot of times, not always, but most of the time, there are precursory earthquakes that happen before a larger earthquake, because it's kind of like the fault line is starting to move, it's starting to get unstuck, and then you'll have the final break. And that is kind of what happened here. And since they're on those two separate faults, as I said, they're all interconnected. When you had the movement on the one fault, it triggered movement on the second fault line. One of the misconceptions, and it's hard to fathom, it sounds like they're close in size, 7.2 to 7.5. Just from the numbers and how we interpret it as lay people, it can seem like, oh, they're not that much bigger, they're probably the same size. But what people have to realize is that with magnitude, with the magnitude increases in earthquakes, a 6 is actually, or a 7 is actually like 1,000 times stronger than a 6. So with a 7.2 to 7.5, the 7.5 is actually 3 times more powerful than the 7.2. So it's a quite significant jump, even though the numbers look like they're close together, and it might seem like they would actually be similar sized. But in fact, it is significantly larger. A 7 the Loma Prieta was a 6.9, and that was able to buckle freeways, and that was 3 times less powerful than the 7.2. So you can probably imagine the type of devastation you can expect from, like, with the 6.9 to the 7.5, that would be 6 times more powerful. Yeah, so you can imagine like 6 times more damage. Not to mention it's coupled, so you have 2 of these events at the same time. They're still trying to figure out what happened geologically. It does take time for scientists to kind of understand what happened. There's a lot of different dynamics that go into understanding the earthquake cause and the elements to it, like how much of a rupture there was and stuff like that. So we'll find out more information going on into the future. But yeah, just from the devastation itself, it's very, very clear that this was a significant earthquake. And unfortunately, because of the region that it happened, the civilians themselves were also not very prepared for this event, both, as I mentioned, with the buildings, but also with the response. Because your response to an earthquake also affects your ability to survive something like this. As I said at the beginning, the most common causes of death with earthquakes is things falling on people, which is why it's super important to get under something sturdy when an earthquake begins. And if you do not have that background knowledge and are not well versed in emergency situations, regardless of whatever disaster it is, you're less likely to make the intelligent decisions, because the natural human inclination is to freak out, is to panic. I myself, when I was in 8th grade, we went through a 5.2 earthquake, which lasted less than 30 seconds. It literally sounded like a large moving truck drove by our house, and it kind of shifted the walls, so you could hear the creaking and like the cracking of some of our plastered walls, but it really was not very impactful at all. 5.0 earthquakes are typically under 30 seconds long, usually around like 15 seconds long. The Loma Prieta, which was a 6.9, that one was about 45 seconds, I believe. Let's see. Yeah, that one, 20 seconds. The Loma Prieta lasted, depending on where you were, 10 to 15 seconds. Because your distance from the epicenter will also affect how the earthquake impacts your area. Also, the material that your house or buildings are lying on will also affect the significance of the earthquake. For example, parts of California are on landfill, where they basically like took dirt and filled in the wetlands. Or if you're on certain types of soils, certain types of rocks, they affect how the waves travel through them differently. And so you can get more shaking even with a lesser earthquake if the ground is looser, because it allows more movement within the ground, and doesn't propagate the same as if you were going through solid bedrock. Solid bedrock will allow the waves to pass through without transferring up to the surface. And you'll have less surface faulting where the ground itself breaks apart into puzzle pieces like we see in some of the much, much larger earthquakes. The San Francisco earthquake, which was a 7.9, I believe, was, I think that one was 45 seconds. 7.9. It was, I think, 42 seconds. And that ruptured around 300 miles of the fault line. And then in comparison, again, the largest Japan earthquake lasted over 10 minutes, I believe. Let me double check. I always like to look things up so I don't accidentally give you incorrect information. The 2011 Tohoku earthquake, which caused that significant tsunami, lasted 6 minutes. And I believe in 1964 we had the largest earthquake in the world, and that one I think was 10 minutes. So you can kind of see how significant the difference is. Okay, that one was So the largest earthquake ever recorded in modern history happened in Chile. It was in 1960, and that one was close to 10 minutes long. And that is additionally why large earthquakes are so damaging, because not only is it a larger shock wave affecting the earth, the shaking is a lot more noticeable and defined, but it also is longer. And so if you shake a building for a longer period of time, you're more likely to accrue significant damage on that fault line. Let's see. I think the Venezuela earthquake was roughly 20 to 30 seconds. The 2 minutes. The Venezuela earthquake that we just had lasted about 2 minutes. So you can imagine 2 minutes. Doesn't sound very long, but if you're in an earthquake for 2 minutes, that is going to significantly increase your panic and anxiety. And if you don't have background knowledge and how to protect yourself, and you don't know what to do, you're far more likely to make rash decisions and freak out. As I was explaining a little bit ago, I had experienced a 5.2 when I was in 8th grade, and even with my knowledge of earthquakes, I was fascinated with them. I did a project on earthquakes when I was like, I don't know, 4th grade, something like that. I panicked. I cried, and I remember being upset with myself for crying because I thought, well, I should be enjoying this because of my interest in earthquakes. But it can be a very visceral experience to go through an earthquake, particularly one that is violent. And so that affected the death toll because people were not prepared for an earthquake of this size. It had been a while since they had a large earthquake in this area. And so It wasn't really in people's minds. If we had an earthquake in California, scientists are saying that we are far better prepared for earthquakes in California than they were in Venezuela. Another example, in Japan, they expect these earthquakes frequently. They very often have 6, 7, 8s. But the people knowing this and it being such a part of their daily experience, or at least general day-to-day life, the knowledge that this can happen, and it happens all over their islands, people are a lot more prepared. And I've seen videos of people in Japan going through these large earthquakes, and they're just sitting at their desk, like going with the shaking. And so that element of fear can significantly affect the people's response to these earthquakes and their ability to kind of recover post-earthquake. When we had the 1906 earthquake in California, I've read a lot of reports on what it was like post-earthquake, and a lot of people were dazed, confused. They didn't know what was happening. People were like wandering aimlessly on the streets because they had no clue what had happened, what to do. This was the first major earthquake that affected a major city in California, and it was very devastating. I would compare the damage to the Venezuelan earthquakes. It leveled buildings. A lot of them were made of brick and mortar and stone. Also, a lot of them were made of wood, and because at the time we used mostly flames to light our homes, they didn't really have a lot of electricity at infrastructure at the time, but they also had a significant fire event as well, triggered by the earthquake. And so they had what I at least would call comparable devastation in the destruction of the city. So, yeah, to summarize, Venezuela's effects from these earthquakes were caused by multiple different factors. One, the fact that you had two very large earthquakes in proximity to each other, both time and space. You have a city that has not had a significant earthquakes since 1960s. And so a lot of the people alive today had not experienced a major earthquake. That was 80 years ago. And so anybody that experienced that 60s earthquake, they probably even forgot what it was like themselves. And most of them would have been, by that point, like at the very least in their 80s. So yeah, a lot of the people were not prepared. And then on top of that, you have a city that was not built to withstand earthquakes. In Japan, where they've done all that significant work on their infrastructure, you can actually have buildings that, even in a 7-8, the buildings are kind of swaying back and forth because they put them on almost like springs. And so the building itself moves, but it doesn't allow it to collapse. They've used certain materials within the building, primarily metal, that also allow for twisting and movement without it actually collapsing. Because, as I said, when you have waves moving through solid stone or through stone held together by mortar or concrete blocks that are put together and stacked to create these buildings with rebar and stuff like that, they will twist with the earthquake and it'll basically rip the building apart. Earthquakes are very much capable of ripping up streets, pulling apart rocks, um, bending rebar. So if you are in areas that have significant earthquakes, it's very important to create buildings that actually are able to absorb the shock waves rather than having it pass into the building. And as I said, like, I've seen people in significant earthquakes in Japan that are just kind of like riding it out as if they're used, because they're used to it, and their buildings are far safer, so they aren't as panicked. My mom went through the Loma Prieta earthquake, and she said people were panicking because when their buildings started shaking, the doors wouldn't open because of how the earth was moving. And they were freaking out because they weren't able to get outside. And the most striking story that she told me is the parking lot was literally rippling like the ocean because of the types of shock waves that were running through the earth. And that particular area she was living in is on landfill. And as I said earlier, landfill moves with the waves rather than allowing it to pass through underneath the buildings that are there. And so there was far more significant damage than there would have been in certain areas where they're on bedrock. So yeah, those are the reasons why this Venezuelan earthquake was so damaging. But this is going to affect the city for a very long time. They're just looking at the imagery. It is heartbreaking to think about how many people were not able to get out of these buildings because they are piles of rubble. It's just like windows torn up and big pieces of stone thrown all over the place. If you've ever seen tornado damage, it looks very similar, but just on a much, much larger scale. And this particular earthquake to scientists was not a surprise. They actually flagged flagged the fault lines that these earthquakes happened on as high risk areas. Since the 1906, I always bring up because it was a fundamental earthquake that really changed and kickstarted the seismology field. It was the first earthquake that happened in a major region, and they had a plethora of data available to them where they're able to measure the distance of the fault line and start developing an understanding of how fault lines work, how earthquakes work. And now today, scientists are actually able to provide a couple seconds to possibly a couple minutes of warning in advance of the earthquake. I think in Japan they have like a 30-second lead time, just because they can detect the shift right as it's happening, right before it's happening, so they can put out warnings to people on their phones. And then in the broad scheme, scientists with our technology are able to estimate the amount of stress that has built up on fault lines. And so they're able to give estimations of potential regions that are at risk and the size that they potentially could expect. So they had already estimated that this earthquake could happen. But unfortunately, as I've said, they don't have the same type of warning systems, understandings, and like infrastructure changes that would have made this less impactful. Right now, they're still going through the process of finding people who are missing, and they are really struggling to kind of keep up with everything that's been happening to people on the ground. This country right now has been struggling from years of economic shifts and political issues. Um, and one of the aspects of um, of their city is they don't have an adequate healthcare system, and so their hospitals and clinics are very much overwhelmed by the influx of people that were injured or killed by this series of events. Right now, there's also a conspiracy theory that the government is hiding the scale of the emergency from civilians. I don't know too much about the political systems in Venezuela, so I won't go too much into that. I don't want to add to speculation and whatnot. But that is something that is kind of going on right now, where people feel like the government isn't doing enough to communicate what is happening. There are ways that you can help. There are charities that are working with the communities that were deeply affected by these regions. And there are ways that you can donate both money, resources, and time if you have that ability. Oftentimes, with earthquakes of these size, people will travel from all over the world just to come help look for people. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can help out people that are there. So if you're able to, there's a couple different organizations that I would suggest. One of them is I had my article up, and it is CRS, which is the Catholic Relief Services. You can donate to them, and they are sending in supplies, emergency assistance. It helps open shelters for people that are displaced and have lost their homes. They provide safe water, because that's another aspect of earthquakes, is they very easily disrupt the other forms of infrastructure, access to food, access to water, access to healthcare. Roads are damaged, so people can't travel. Communication lines have been disrupted, so they can't communicate with family members to let them know they're okay, or to find members that are missing. And so the Catholic Relief Services are taking donations, monetary donations, and I think that they would also take physical donations, especially if you are in those areas. That's one place that you're able to donate to help protect people. There's also CARE. They also are taking monetary donations, so they can do very similar things to the Catholic services that I just mentioned. They're providing hygiene kits, safe water distribution, health services, meals and food baskets. And this one I like as well, because they're also providing safe spaces and trying to prevent violence against women and girls. Because unfortunately, with large disruptive events, whether it's war or natural disasters, women and girls are more likely to experience violence or other things, if you get my drift, because a lot of them lose their homes, they might lose their spouses, and so they're vulnerable to people that are predatory. So one last one is UNICEF. This one probably is the most notable or most well-known organizations. They are often they very frequently go in and help people during disasters, and so they are also making sure that emergency support is available to families and particularly children. So that is, again, another organization that you can donate to help people suffering from these twin disasters. So I'm going to shift gears. One, I want to put my heart out there to everyone who went through this. This is deeply traumatizing because not only have they gone through a significant natural disaster, but they've also lost their communities, the buildings they know. It's unrecognizable in certain areas, and that's going to be deeply traumatizing to the people that go through there, not to mention anybody who lost family members, friends, people that the communities that they know. So my heart goes out to anybody going through this, and I just pray that the death toll is not as high as they speculate it can be. I hope those 73,000 people that are missing are found alive and okay. So with that being said, I also, because it's in the news right now, I really, really wanted to talk about the heat waves that are affecting Europe, which have also caused a significant amount of deaths. And I think it's really important that we have a brief discussion, at least, on this as it's happening. I'll probably do another additional episode in the near future, just to discuss all the different weather events that are happening right now, because there's some craziness going on. But I wanted to talk specifically about the heat wave that's happening in Europe, because one, it is absolutely record breaking, and two, it's been very deadly. And then additionally, I've noticed some misinformation going around, so I also wanted to clear that up as well. But if you have not heard about it, Europe has been going through a severe heat wave, and I cannot emphasize that enough. The world record for hottest temperatures ever on Earth happened in 1916. I think 1916. It occurred in Death Valley. Shocker. Very fitting name. Near Furnace Creek. Again, super fitting. And let me just double check the date. 1913. And temperatures reached 134 degrees, which is crazy. I've experienced 115 degrees when I went to Las Vegas when I was a kid. And I felt like I was suffocating. Like, breathing in felt like I couldn't. Like, I felt like I could not breathe. It's if you've ever experienced it, you know. And if you add on humidity, it makes it even worse. I've been to Houston in June, and I made the mistake of bringing San Diego clothes, and man, that was excruciating. So in France, Germany, large swaths of Europe, Spain, Italy, they have been having temperatures in excess of 110 degrees, and Paris reached 130 degrees. It only takes, I think, like 80-degree weather can cause the inside of a car to reach like 115, 120 degrees. So you can imagine how hot the inside of a car or building would get at 120, 30 degrees. You could potentially, like, I saw one video where it was like 100-degree day, and the inside of the car got to like 150 degrees. And I mean, you can cook things at that temperature. I have seen people like that old thing of like, you could cook an egg on the sidewalk. That is genuine. I've seen people throw water on these sidewalks and it boils instantly. This is a dangerous level of heat. It can burn your skin. If you walk on the asphalt or animals walking on the asphalt, they'll end up with like second, possibly third degree burns, depending on how long they're on the ground, to the bottom of their feet. I've seen people like putting their hand on something and it literally like burns their hand. It's currently the worst recorded heat wave ever. And one of the issues in Europe is that they have a lot of people don't actually have air conditioning. In Europe, it's more customary for people to use like windows and whatnot to just like air out their homes. And a lot of them are older buildings that just don't have air conditioning installed. And as a result, they've had over 1,000 excess deaths, which means 1,000 more deaths that they normally have as a result of this heat wave. A lot of the deaths, most of the deaths, involved people that were 65 and older. And the reason why very young children and very old individual, or I guess older individuals, are more susceptible to heat deaths are because their bodies have a harder time regulating temperatures. Their sweat glands have changed, their metabolism has changed, and and so they are again more susceptible to this lingering heat. Another issue that's been occurring that has contributed to these deaths is there's a term for it. I forgot what the term is. Something summer. Anyway, if it is hot enough, and if the wind systems and stuff are not helpful, basically, you can actually have these hot temperatures extend into the night. And if your environment is not given the chance to cool off at night, you're at a higher risk of a bunch of different things, most notably heart attacks, because the body, like at night, your body cools down, and just the mechanisms of sleep are dependent on like cooler temperatures to do all of the stuff that sleep does for us. And if your body's not given the chance to cool down, you can die in your sleep just from the heat in the house. And then also because you are not conscious, you're not able to respond to that heat. And so a lot of people have been dying in their homes in the middle of the night because of the significant accumulation of heat. Also, cities are far more dangerous during heat waves than countrysides, and depending on the type of suburbs, because of the way cities are built. In cities, you have more roads, you have more paved surfaces, you have all the buildings kind of together, close quarters, and as a result, these areas are able to hold on to more heat. As I hope all of us know, darker surfaces absorb more heat, not to mention most roads are made of asphalt, tar, sometimes other material like rubber, stuff like that, but they're usually black, and as a result, they get significantly hotter than other types of surfaces. If you have plant matter surfaces, lawns and whatever, they're able to mitigate the heat better There's more moisture within them. The color also has an impact. So when you have just tar and like hot, heat absorbing surfaces, you're going to have what's called the heat island effect, where the heat literally goes back into the air from the ground. That's why you see on really hot days the wavy lines coming off the pavement. That is the heat affecting the air. And so you're literally seeing the heat rising back out of the ground. And it allows the heat waves to not only get hotter in cities, that's why Paris was able to reach 130 degrees, but it also makes it so it holds on to the heat longer. I don't know if you've ever noticed before, but on hot days, even towards the end of the day, the ground is still physically hot. Like you can still feel it. Anybody that's been in sports and has had to play in the heat, you can feel the heat coming off of the ground. And that contributes to the amount of heat overall. And this particular event is going to last a while. They estimate that the heat wave can linger for as long as 10 days, even after this weather system has abated. Heat waves, just like storms, are caused by particular processes in the environment or in the atmosphere. Oftentimes they're caused by a low pressure system sitting on a certain area for a long period of time, because it basically like compresses the air into the ground. And when you have the sun coming through, it allows it to kind of cook the ground. And besides it being deadly, it's also significantly affecting the infrastructure as well. They have had to close trams and trains because it's affecting the tracks. The tram in Germany, in Leipzig, the tracks themselves, because they're made of metal, expanded and disrupted the ability of the trains to actually travel on them. So they had to close down the entire system. They also have had roadways buckling as a result of the heat, because they expand just like the rails did. They've been having railroad tracks also bending in, I believe it was France, or it was either France or Italy. Their railways are kind of put into the ground, and then they have like a tar type solution that keeps it stuck into the ground. That has been melting and coming up through the cracks. And so you'll see images of train tracks with like bubbling asphalt looking material coming out from under the railroads. And so that has made those unusable and unsafe. It also has been putting pressure on electricity networks, because the heat can affect the ability of like the machinery and stuff from working. And also with more people using air conditioning when they do have it, or people using other electrical means to help themselves, you're going to overload the electricity systems. It's very common to have power outages during heat waves because of people using significantly more electricity. And then hospitals and emergency services have also been significantly affected, because they can't keep up with the amount of people that are coming in with heat stroke and heat exhaustion. Heat exhaustion is the first level, where it's starting to affect your physiology. Heat stroke is when you're actually getting sick. You can also get sun poisoning, where the solar rays are literally poisoning your body because it's building up that form of radiation into your body. And then, of course, the deaths that are occurring are hurting the emergency services ability to keep up with the amount of people that are coming in. One thing I wanted to point out is I've seen a viral picture going around of street lights being or stoplights, traffic lights being affected by this heat and are melting. That is fake. That one is not true. The pictures that they're using are from a fire that ended up melting the traffic light from a while ago, and that is not true. The stoplights are not melting, but the roads are. The railroads and stuff are being affected. That is true. So before I close, I wanted to give a little bit of advice if you are in these regions. Obviously, this is not limited to Europe. Parts around the Mediterranean, in the United States, even the eastern seaboard of the United States, which typically gets those nice cooler temperatures. You get the humidity, but you're by the ocean, and you typically don't get as hot temperatures as you would see in California, Arizona, New Mexico, stuff like that, Nevada. They have Washington, D.C. was expected to get to 115 degrees. That is something that you can expect in Las Vegas, but definitely not something the area on the East Coast would be prepared for. So this applies to people all over. As I said, Europe is not the only one experiencing these hot temperatures. And it's, as I said, with the earthquake, it's very important to understand how to protect yourself because it can save your life. To know, one, how to stay cool, but also how to recognize the signs that your body's getting too hot. First and foremost, do not leave your pets or kids in the cars. Even for 5 minutes, those temperatures can skyrocket. In 60 to 80 degree weather, you can still have 100-degree temperatures inside the car if it's a bright sunny day and it's shining into the car. I myself have gotten sun poisoning and heat stroke from falling asleep in a car waiting for my mom to do some food shopping because I just wanted to hang out in the car. I woke up like profusely sweating. I was confused. I ended up being sick for like 2 or 3 days after that, where I was so exhausted. I was sleeping all day and I got physically sick. It's no joke. And with small little bodies, dogs and children, they can heat up very quickly and it can kill them rapidly. So yeah, first and foremost, do not leave living beings in cars in general, you shouldn't, but during these heat events, it will be fatal to them. So if you're going to be outside and doing things, make sure that you're drinking water, lots of water, because these heat waves will make you sweat profusely. And dehydration is not only something that can complicate and speed up the process of heat stroke, heat exhaustion, but it also can cause damage to your body, physical damage to your body. It can cause kidney problems, liver problems. The heat can also cause breathing difficulties. So if you're going to be outdoors, drink plenty of water, but honestly, I would advise you to remain indoors. If you're 90-degree weather plus, I would advise you not to partake in physical activities, particularly the hottest part of the day, which would usually be from like noon to 3-ish, depending on where you are. If you are going to go out, make sure you're wearing light clothing, both in consistency and color. Wear white, wear beige, light colors. materials like linen, and like the more lightweight fabrics. Um, and then if you have family members that are elderly, or that you know, or neighbors that are elderly, um, or people that you know don't have air conditioning, check in on them. Make sure that you are keeping in contact with people that are more vulnerable to reduce the risk of unknown deaths as a result. Um, if you don't have access to air conditioning, um, or like if you're homeless and you don't have access to um, the indoors, they a lot of places do have cooling centers where they dedicate like a gym or a large space to just cooling and have water available and sometimes food and stuff like that. Um, if you need them, try to find something like that. That can help you. And if you start to experience these signs of heat illness of various types, or if you're having breathing difficulties, heart problems, go to the hospitals, and be very, and if there's somebody around you that is starting to experience confusion, fatigue, they're passing in and out of consciousness, they are sweating profusely, or worse, if their skin is dry. Once their skin is dry, that means like they're basically dehydrated and they're overheated. If they show any signs of like brain dysfunction, take them to the hospital immediately, because heat can be deadly. You don't have to be in a car for it to be deadly. Hikers die from heat exposure. Even people that are professionals, it can make you confused and walk off the trail, or your body just is not able to keep up with what you're doing. And if you're exerting energy, doing sports, hiking, biking, whatever, you're going to get hot even faster, because, when we exercise, the internal body temperature increases as you're burning energy burning energy off. So it's very, very important to try and limit your activities during heat waves like this. And lastly, cool yourself down somehow, like go swimming, go in the sprinklers. I've seen a video recently in Spain, I believe, where there was a guy just standing in the town square area with a hose, and he was just spraying people as they walked by. You can get personal misters, you can get personal, like the little fans, but try to find ways to cool yourself down if it is that hot, because heat is no joke. Heat waves kill more people than almost any other type of disaster. And it can also be deceiving, because you might think that it's not that bad, but it's still going to be affecting your body. So I just wanted to talk about this because it's it's a significant event, and unfortunately, with climate change, with this impending El Nino, which creates hotter temperatures across the globe, it's more likely that we're going to see events like this. This was very, very significant. And think about it, we're only in June. July and August are typically the hottest times of the year. And this year, what they've been saying is the past 25 days have been, every single day has broken the record of the day before. So we can anticipate that it's only going to get hotter. And if we're already seeing 115, 130 degrees in areas that are not used to this, I cannot imagine how excruciating it's going to be into the future as things get even hotter. So again, I'm going to revisit this topic because there's a lot going on with the weather. With climate change, you're going to see things on both sides of the spectrum, and we are seeing that right now. So I really want to continue talking about this to keep people safe, make people aware, make the connections to what's happening, because we're not at the peak of this El Nino yet. And so we can anticipate that it is going to get worse. It is going to get hotter and more dangerous. And 1,000 people have already died. We're probably going to see more. And if I can help and reduce the impacts on people, I would love to do so. So I will continue to talk about this and all of the different events that are happening throughout the summer. Other than that, I pray for anybody going through this. I personally hate the heat. I like to be in the middle ground. I love being in the city I'm in because it can get hot, but it also is more moderate in comparison to places like Arizona and the desert of California. So I am glad that I am not experiencing this form of heat right now. But I just pray that everyone stays safe. Be wary of what's happening and do not let your guard down because, as I said, heat is not something to mess with. It affects your body in a lot of different ways that can increase your chances of heart attacks and other forms of illnesses that can be fatal. And I'm going to say this one more time. Do not leave your kids and your pets in the cars because it will kill them if they're there long enough. And it does not take very long. So please be safe. Keep yourself cool. Go swimming. Don't go hiking. Drink lots of water. If you need it, find a cooling place, cooling shelter, and be safe. So thank you guys for watching. I hope that this was useful information to you and encourages you to be more thoughtful during these types of heat waves. And again, I pray that it does not get worse than this and that this heat wave abates and that we don't see a significant amount of deaths because it can definitely happen. So thank you guys, and I will be back on Friday. So again, thank you for watching. I hope you have a good day.
Own attitude towards the possibilities of peace, towards the Soviet Union, towards the course of the Cold War.
Our muscle. It was a way of making me feel that they were a part of me.
You see it on the bridge. Wait, how they get it? If the government had to change the screw in the bridge, they had to shut it down. They got state troopers out there. They got lanes closed. They got their strange machines. How did they get up there?